Hello and welcome to another episode of the Aim High podcast. Today I'm joined by tech consumer expert Laura Lee. She has held several senior roles at notable companies such as YouTube and Twitch. At YouTube, she was in charge of partnerships, and at Twitch, she was a chief content officer. She has also served on multiple company boards like WatchMojo and has also advised Patreon. She is now the CEO of O-Type, helping high growth and established companies grow. Please welcome Laura Lee to the Aim High podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
All right. Well, to start off, because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American. Ideas instilled within you from your parents and your environment may have helped you become successful in where you are today. So for the very first question, could you explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you grow up? Did you have any siblings? What were family dynamics like?
So I am a proud product of Brooklyn, New York. So I'm a third generation ABC, American Born Chinese. And I was super lucky to grow up in this awesome neighborhood called Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the same house that my dad grew up in. And rewinding a little bit, my father's parents were the first Asians who ever bought in the neighborhood of Bay Ridge. So we've seen really different generations of very different kind of, I'd say, racial patterns, if you will. So obviously it was very, very tough for them in the beginning, but by the time I came around, it was a very tight-knit community and it was really nice. So I think I had the best of both worlds in terms of, having a very, Chinese American upbringing, but also living in a very American kind of neighborhood.
Yeah. And how did you kind of balance that? I guess you were kind of saying that Asian American kind of identity with being also American when you were growing up.
Yeah. So I think for me, I felt super lucky because, being third generation, there are a lot of privileges that come with that. My parents were, born in the U.S. They were educated in the U.S., so that was super helpful. But I went to school, growing up in Brooklyn and then going to high school in New York City with such a diverse kind of multi-culti background that it was really nice to be able to experience all of that. And frankly, that's how so many of my curiosities or knowledge about other cultures came from, really living in the melting pot of what is New York City, which is, I still think, one of the most diverse cities in the world, and dare I say, the best.
Yeah. And how did your parents' experiences, and maybe even your grandparents, because they were closer to the ones immigrating here, how did their experiences of work and success play off on you, and how did you learn from them about those things?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think there's an old saying that says by the time you're third or fourth generation, that's when everything goes downhill. And so I'd like to think that I still have held on to the Asian values that my grandparents and that my parents taught us. And I'm, God willing, hopefully, teaching my children them as well. Clearly being brought up with all the different tales. And also, look, New York City is amazing, but I think we all have experienced our own different kinds of difficulties with racism, what have you. So it was very eyes wide open, and it was very much I know this sounds so stereotypical at this point, but from my grandparents and my parents, it's education, working really hard, making sure that you keep your head down. But then I think the beauty of also being raised as an American is also being curious and not being afraid to voice your opinions, which I think can be very interesting when you deal with being an Asian American executive, because then you sometimes come up against different cultural, maybe misunderstandings in the beginning where people expect you to be a certain way. And then when you're not, then you have to deal with sort of demystifying that model minority mystique, if you will.
Yeah, and a lot of my guests have talked about that importance of education and a lot of their parents, grandparents instilling those values in them. And like you said, the part about keeping your head down, but then also being able to raise your voice. I was just wondering, when you were a kid, were you able to kind of raise your voice, or did you always kind of think
keep
my head down, keep on working, or what was your kind of balance on that situation?
So I probably erred on the side of too much being the voice. And I do think part of that might be a privilege of being third generation. I think for me, my parents definitely always taught us to, you do the best that you can in school and work really hard. But then I was super lucky in that, I loved singing, I loved performing, and that's something that my parents encouraged, so long as I didn't do it full time as a job. And so I think it was that really unique combination of, in particular, in my parents in different ways, but my mom especially has always been such a big champion of mine. And
Mm-hmm.
she always pushed me to say, hey, I know you're really capable, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what you're going to end up being when you grow up, but I want you to achieve whatever you can achieve. So if that means you want to go to graduate school, go to graduate school. If that
Mm-hmm.
means that I want you to have a career, like go pursue that to your fullest potential. And I think I was super lucky because my mom, her job, which I think is the hardest job, was being a stay-at-home mom. And I think
Yeah.
for her, she kind of wished that she had been able to have a career, but given how things happened, her responsibility was raising us. And so she was always my biggest supporter with going
Mm-hmm.
out and seeking whatever I set my heart to.
Yeah. So your parents, especially your mom, really gave you like that type of freedom to choose kind of what you wanted to do with your career.
Yeah. I mean, my dad is, I come from a family of doctors on my dad's side. So I think, still the failure. I dropped pre-med after first semester. And I think I broke my dad's heart. And he still was, no joke, giving me post-bac materials, even at my HBS graduation. He's like, it's not too late. You can still be a doctor. And I know
Yeah.
that's, again, very akin to the Asian American experience, but I think it is kind of one of those interesting things where when I chatted with my dad, he was like, being a doctor is one of the most important jobs. And it wasn't because it's, one of the tick the boxes of the success metrics. And yes, right, that
Mm-hmm.
you can say that's one of our tropes, if you will. But for him, he was like, every day I'm helping people and I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
help save lives. And
Yeah.
it's a really high bar because
Yeah.
then when I think about my career, I'm like, am I saving lives? I'm not saving lives like doctors are. So I have tremendous respect for anyone in the
Yeah.
healthcare industry who actually does do that.
Yeah. And were there any specific like lessons or either like specific moments that you could remember that kind of led to like some foundation for like maybe your future success? That might sound like a reach, but like just any memories that you can think of where you like really learned some type of lesson when you were younger.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a bunch of them. My dad, for example, being a doctor, he chose to be an inner city doctor, and even though he's a pulmonologist, his path took him towards, leading different inner city hospitals at state psychiatric centers. So
Mm-hmm.
it was, he worked in Bed-Stuy for decades. It was super dangerous, and visiting him at work or going on call with him way back when you were allowed to bring your children on call, that would never happen now, was
Yeah.
really eye-opening. I mean, it was amazing to see his bedside manner, but it was also amazing to see how he was putting in really hard work, helping people who had no safety net. Like their
Mm-hmm.
last safety net was the state psychiatric system, and they could only be there for a limited time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think being able to see that and take a step back and say, I'm pretty lucky for whatever I
Yeah.
have. And it just was, I think, that combined with an innate curiosity to just sort of say, hey, if there's something that's interesting, even if I'm not good at it, I think that's where the work ethic comes in, where it's like, okay, if you're not good at it, then you have to try really hard to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
you can be decent at it. And then maybe one day you can even master it.
Yeah, and like that kind of leads on to the next question is like, was there like kind of a moment in your childhood where you kind of knew what you wanted to do? Like you mentioned that your father really wanted you to be a doctor, but like where was your heart at for like what you wanted to do later?
Yeah, so I am definitely not one of those people who absolutely knew in a bolt of lightning moment that I was going to be X or Y. I mean, if anything, my poor parents, I drove them crazy because it's funny when I mentor people and they ask me, oh, how did you know? What was your plan? I
Yeah.
don't think I was misdirected, but I didn't necessarily have a plan like a consultant where it's like at the 5 year mark, I'm going to be this, or the 10 year mark. I
Mm-hmm.
think what I've been fortunate with in my career is really sort of following my passions and my curiosity. And that's why I've had more of perhaps a circuitous path, if you will, with my career than one that I would have anticipated. I mean, way back when I thought I was going to be a doctor. When I was in college, I thought I was going to go to public policy grad school and, work in city government. And then, I ended up staying on in investment banking. And then I always loved the creative field, having grown up performing and singing. And I always knew that I loved media. So it just kind of serendipitously happened that way. But I certainly could not say that when I was your age, Ben. I was like, oh yes, I'm going to be doing this, this, and that.
Yeah, I feel like nowadays so many people, or at least sometimes it feels like everyone wants or like knows what they want to do, but like even now, like I have like kind of like an interest, but like I'm not even sure really. So
yeah, well, I'm sure you'll go on to do great things, and I would just say, let your curiosity drive you too. That makes it fun.
Yeah. And as we move on to the second part of the podcast, talking about education and early career, what was your undergrad experience like? And like, how did that, maybe your time during undergrad kind of shape what you wanted to do or kind of let you explore different like possibilities? Yeah.
I had an awesome time in college. Again, disappointed the parents. I went as far away as I could. I was only allowed to apply within a 4-hour driving distance. So I really wanted to go to California for college, but I was not allowed to apply there. So Brown was the farthest I could go from New York City.
Yeah.
But it was just, I think, the right school and the environment for me. I went to a really rigorous high school. I loved my high school, but it was really intensely STEM and all that stuff. And then being able to go to Brown, which has an open curriculum, and clearly I went in there being a pre-med major and thinking that I was going to do that. And then by second semester freshman year, I knew that I loved poli-sci and public policy and things like that. And the amazing thing about Brown on, I think, 2 different levels is academically, you could construct your own multidisciplinary major if you'd like. And I didn't do that because I wanted to study abroad for a little bit, but that's the beauty of having such an open, blank notebook, if you will, to figure that out. And then it was just so awesome for me to just meet so many different people. I mean, I really delved deeply into the Asian American community, the community of color. I was finally able to really dig deep into singing and performing, which in high school I could do that a little bit, but I was a speech and debate nerd. So it was just, I think, the really perfect kind of petri dish for me to, pursue so many different passions. And I think Brown is unique in being able to offer so many different things to different types of people, and they can create their own path if they want to.
Yeah. And like you mentioned the studying abroad. And I've heard like I did like kind of a similar program when I was a couple summers ago. I went to Japan, but I was just wondering like what your experience like and how it maybe gave you a different perspective as it did for me. So
yeah, I mean, I know it's so impossible, it seems like, for your generation too, to study abroad, and this is so hypocritical because I don't know if my kids will be able to study abroad, but I strongly recommend it. I was a big baby. I was too scared to go for a year. Probably would have been better, but so again, at Brown you can hedge things. So I went to London for a semester. I ended up going to King's College, and I studied philosophy and geography. And geography is more like history and stuff over there. And it was just really magical. Actually, one of my best friends from that time, we were friendly at Brown, but we were not super close. He ended up being on the same program as me, and we became best friends. And it was just really magical to be able to, and by the way, I was a wimp, right? Like I went to another English speaking country, but it was fantastic to be able to do that. And then to just, pick up and travel and just to sort of be on your own, make new friends, but live in a foreign country. And what was fascinating to me, it made me so proud to be Asian American, but also American, because at least at that time, I would get all of these questions of, where are you from? And I'd say, oh, Brooklyn. No, where are you really from? And I'm like, Brooklyn again. Yeah. And really what they were asking me was, what are you?
Yeah,
and
like so what race are you?
Yes, exactly. And I'd say, I'm American. And it would always get poo-pooed. It was always no, you're not. Where are you really from? And I was like, well, my ancestry is Chinese. My grandparents came from Guangzhou and Hengguang. But I'm like, I am Asian American. And it was fascinating to be treated as other. At least then it was like, you can't possibly be American because you're not Caucasian. It's like, but I am, but
Yeah.
okay, thank you. And so I think sometimes when we go outside of our home countries, it really makes you appreciate what you have. And if you don't do that, then sometimes you don't appreciate that. So that's why overall, I really encourage people to study abroad or try to work abroad because it just really expands your horizons.
Yeah, definitely. And can you maybe explain that journey to your first job at JP Morgan as an analyst? And I saw you were in the technology and like media sector, and like was that on purpose? Like because like following like looking at your career now, it seems like that's kind of like the area you went in, but was that first move on purpose?
So again, super lucky. I would never, ever, ever get a job in banking now. My friends and I, we joke around about this. Like I am the non-traditional hire. I was a non-traditional hire for back then, given that I was a liberal arts major and Brown at that point really didn't have a business major. But I had worked at Chase for a few summers beforehand, so I wasn't completely a candidate coming from left field. For me, I think it was one of those situations where I always like to challenge myself. And so it was a challenge because I knew it would be really hard to get an investment banking job, especially given my background. But I thought, I know I'm a really hard worker, and I know that I'm one of those people where if there's a challenge that's set before me, I view it as a good opportunity and I don't get daunted by it. And so this sounds so cheesy, but I chose JP Morgan, true to my Brown roots, based on the cultural fit. Which everyone was telling me that is not how you choose an investment bank. You should be looking at league tables and that stuff. And coming from Brown, I didn't know what they were talking about. But I really did love the people that I met. The older folks who had gone to Brown that I met through the recruiting process were lovely. And I thought, oh, these are my people. And so back then, my first rotation was actually through credit, which was great. And I ended up working more so on TMT stuff. But that just happened serendipitously. Like I also worked on some industrials. And then through that, I got to know the TMT corporate finance group. And then I went there because I said, that was, I'm going to ground the conversation saying that was like Web 1.0. That's when like AnswerStreet.com was just coming up, and there were all these really cool first generation digital businesses that were up. And I thought, I want to go there. That's super fascinating. So it was not something where they placed you as an analyst immediately, but it's certainly something that I gravitated towards, and it made sense because that's where a lot of my passions were.
Yeah. And like what foundation did this time at JP Morgan give you for like your future and like your other jobs?
So, I mean, I have no idea if it's still the same. I hope it is, but perhaps with AI, it's not. But a really great foundation. I don't remember what my ATP class is. I should know this. I think it was ATP 8. I think one of my good friends, I had to ask him. But it was a really special time. And I truly hope that banks still have something like this. So you're put together in these cohorts with roughly the same age people. And of course, there were, I think, literally 2 or 3 of us who were not finance, econ majors. And we all were like, what's going on? And so they taught you like the basics of modeling, DCFs, and all that stuff. But, and they grounded you in the history of the firm, which was really cool as well. But you did that program and then you were sort of just thrown in. And so I think for me, it was certainly swimming in the deep end right away. But I thought, okay, I got to figure it out. And, met so many amazing people and really nice people. And I think, again, that's part of the reason why I chose JP Morgan, because banking, of course, is competitive, but it didn't seem like everyone was going to be elbows out like some other firms. A few of my closest friends are still from those days. So it's really nice.
Yeah. And then why did you then decide to transition and then go to Time Warner as an associate? And like, what did you do in this new role?
Yeah. So, again, perhaps it was not a good career move. Perhaps it would have been more lucrative if I'd stayed in banking. But I think for me, I mean, I actually was one of the weirdos who I really liked banking. I remember I was proud of myself. I think I held the record for the most all-nighters because I was like, if the guys can do it, I can do it. So I think it was 3 days in a row. And so I was like,
what?
Okay,
That's crazy.
I'm sure you can do that too. Like,
I don't know. I need my sleep. I know. My kids are like, we can't do it. We need our sleep. I'm like, come
that. You can do it. But I mean, look, there was some of that too, where you had to prove yourself, and I was like, I unfortunately can function on not a lot of sleep. Um, but I think for me, it was always I loved when going to client meetings and breaking bread with them and trying to understand where they were coming from, and more importantly, understand what their problem was and trying to figure out how to fix it. And to me, it was I thought I was only going to be able to really understand that if I went corporate side. And so that's why it was really cool for me to be able to go to Time Warner. I began as an analyst and then I was promoted to an associate, which was their back then like post MBA position. And that was really awesome because I was able to be in the controllers group, so was in charge of the budget and the long range planning. But the cool thing was at my level, I was able to be outsourced to a lot of the business units. And that's what really, I think got my creative juices and the synapses firing, because at that point, still kind of Web 1.0, some of the projects that I was outsourced to was helping Parenting Magazine, which was, I wasn't a parent yet, but I knew it was a really cool magazine. But they were thinking about, should we get into this e-commerce thing? Is that crazy? And I was one of the ones saying, yes, we should do it. This is the future. And so I helped them launch their first e-commerce platform. And that was really cool to be able to be outsourced to different companies. At corporate, they had acquired Africana.com, which is Professor Gates's opus back then of trying to document the entire diaspora of the African and African American experience. So being able to help integrate in that company, and they were based in Cambridge. And so I was traveling back and forth to Cambridge. And when I went to HBS, I ended up working for them part-time. So I just feel very grateful for the serendipity of that. And it was a really fantastic company to work for.
Yeah. So then like, was that transition, I guess, like you just wanted like a change of pace or like something different? Because it's like, it said like you seemed like you really enjoyed banking. So like, why even make that switch, I guess?
I think because I fancy myself being a maker. And to me, it's like, if you want to understand how media or content works, then in my mind, you have to get closer and you have to be inside one of those companies to have where the magic happens and to help make the donuts. And as an advisor, you can be, very exposed to that and you can help at the highest levels, but you're not truly in there helping to make the donuts. And that to me has always been something that's really important. Yeah.
And then why did you decide to get your MBA at Harvard Business School? Why did you feel like that was the right time?
So again, with not necessarily having the best of plans, I give credit to one of my close girlfriends at Time Warner. I remember we were both like, they're super late. There's the two of us. She's also Chinese American. Yeah. The two of us, it's like midnight. We're on the floor. We're like, we're the only ones here again. And she's like, aren't you working on your B school applications? And I said, excuse me, what? And she said, why are you not working on your applications? And I genuinely hadn't thought about that, because I thought, first I thought I was going to go to public policy grad school. I deferred that. And then banking happened. And then I thought I would go to law school. And then I audited some classes and didn't like that. And so I was just sort of enjoying my career at Time Warner. And she was like, I think you should really go to business school. And then I thought about it and I thought, she's right. So then I had to cram for the GMAT because I was so behind. She had been studying and I was like, dear God. So I ended up, cramming for the GMAT and working on my applications. And I think for me, HBS was just, I had been able to spend a bunch of time in Cambridge. So a lot of my close friends from high school went to Harvard. So I spent a lot of time there in college. And then by working with Africana.com, I was in Cambridge quite a lot. So I really had developed like an affinity for it. And I thought HBS was just such a great school. And one of my close JP Morgan friends, still a close friend, was a year above me. And so I went and I, slept on his dorm room floor and went to classes. And I thought, this is really cool if I were so lucky to get in. And I was one of the lucky ones to get in.
Yeah. And then could you describe maybe your journey from then on to MTV Music in Logo Group as vice president?
Yes. So again, this is going to show you how I'm a little... This is why I drive my parents crazy. So at HBS, had a great time. The economy wasn't that great. The class of '02 had it worse than my class, but '03 wasn't a great hiring environment either. And I thought at that point that my dream was to become a CEO of a media company. And so I said, well, I understand the business side, but if I
Yeah.
really want to understand how the donuts are made, I have to understand the creative side. So I was one of the crazy people second year, and I met my husband at HBS, and he likes to joke around that you were working your butt off, and the rest of us were enjoying life. And I was, taking the Chinatown bus back,
Yeah.
like way back when Priceline had a you name your price, and so I was naming like $99 round trip to go out to LA because I was a
Yeah.
fully levered business school student. But I really wanted to get in on the creative side, and I had no business getting in on the creative side because my resume had none of that. And so oh my gosh, I can't even count how many closed doors or, cold emails I sent out with no responses. Like it probably
Yeah.
was less than like a 1% response rate if I had to guess. And even when I got people were highly, highly skeptical.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was one of those things where, I knew I would probably have to start as an exec assistant.
Yeah.
And through someone I met during my Time Warner days, he was able to hook me up with an exec assistant temp job out in LA. Did
Yeah.
that, staying on my girlfriend's couch. My parents were losing their minds. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your education? We don't understand you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hubris of youth, because back then I was like, I have so much self-belief. I believe in myself.
Yeah.
Then was able to figure out some full-time opportunities out in LA, but I'm a New Yorker, hence the big babiness.
Yeah.
And my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was in New York. And so I was able to then get a summer internship at Spike TV in TV production and development. And so that is what started my journey at MTV Networks. So for 2 years, I did various creative roles in TV production and development. Got to see a lot of different sides. It was a lot of fun to do production. Was a lot of fun to try to develop TV shows.
Yeah.
And then the opportunity, I'd met the business development team when I first started at MTV, and when an opportunity opened up in that group, I thought, oh, that's perfect, because that's a nice segue to now come back to the business side, but having been armed with understanding how the creative side works, that
Yeah.
hopefully should give me a much more fulsome view of things.
Yeah.
And I ended up heading up that business. So we were in charge of M&A, BD, partnerships, and then I had my own small P&L where I could launch my own digital vertical, video businesses, and
Yeah.
it's like an HD screen that my team ran as well.
Yeah. And how was being that close to like how you put it, like how the donuts are made?
Yeah.
Like how did that being close to that creative side give you more insight to then help you when you go more to the business side? And how is that maybe carried on to like where you are still today?
Yeah, I think certainly there it gave me a lot more street cred with a lot of the execs who had come up more so on the creative side. I think it also taught me that, yes, it's always good to try to understand all aspects of a business,
Yeah.
but it helped me expand my thinking. So you don't always have the opportunity to experience every aspect of donut making, right? That's not necessarily possible, especially I think in this fast moving world now.
Yeah.
But so long as you remain very curious, and I think a hallmark is trying to understand where the other person is coming from, even if it feels very distant or foreign, is really important. And I think that's sort of a lesson that I've carried through my career through now.
Yeah. And then like moving on, like how did you get your role at YouTube as head of North American content partnerships?
So I had met the YouTube guys and the Google Video guys. They were separate at that point when they had pitched us at Viacom. And we'll just say that that was a tense meeting.
Yeah.
At that point, that's when Viacom was on the verge of suing YouTube. But I was really curious, and I was able to, have a good rapport with that team. And when an opportunity came up, they reached out to me and they said, hey, we think you could be a good addition to the team. And at that point, they didn't have many people who had come from the industry. They had a lot of homegrown folks. And so it was an opportunity to go into YouTube, which sounds crazy now, but was not at all, a fait accompli. I
Yeah.
had many folks, particularly in my network, and I think my husband was so keen about it. Like, why are you going to this company that's not doing well and losing money? I don't know if this is
Yeah.
smart. But to me, it was just, again, my curiosity and just saying, like, I want to try it out. I want to
Yeah.
see where this goes. And God willing, it works. And if it doesn't, then I can always return back to media. And so I was
Yeah.
one of their first hires that came from industry and helped them build up the premium business. And then I was able to become the North American head of content,
Yeah.
which was and still is their biggest revenue generating vertical,
Hmm.
and work really closely with a lot of product and engineering leaders to launch a bunch of new product features, which was really gratifying.
Yeah. So what would a regular work week look like for you? Like what would you be doing day to day and like what were kind of the things that you were responsible for?
Oh gosh. Well, I think one thing, and maybe this is also, maybe this is, as my husband says, this is the Chinese in you. I think I'm sort of a recovering workaholic. So I've always worked really hard. I've always enjoyed
Hmm.
working hard. So I worked a lot of hours, and it would range anywhere between, there always a through line would be always meeting or chatting with partners. That's really important, especially I think in an externally facing role.
Hmm.
Always meeting with my team to ensure that they were on track and understanding like what were the priorities. And in a fast moving tech company, there always were product pushes that were
Hmm.
coming out, and we were responsible for the sort of go to market and the adoption, and also ensuring that we could help foster deeper commercialization. So I was lucky to be based in New York, and I collaborated very closely with Google Sales because in the beginning days of YouTube, we always had a ton of engagement, but it was hard to monetize. And
Yeah.
so being able to piggyback off of my media experience, I went in actually mostly for Vice because that was a really difficult sale at that point. And I would
Yeah.
go in with the respective ad sales force and help them sell it into brands to
Mm.
help them understand why YouTube wasn't as scary as it seemed back then, and how being able to capitalize on that engagement would actually be beneficial for the brand. So,
Mm.
this sounds very hackneyed, but I wouldn't say that there was any typical day, and I think that happens when you're working in a global environment where you know P0 fire drills happen all the time, and
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And like what were some of those partnerships, like content partnerships that you would work on? Like could you maybe give us a couple examples?
Yeah, gosh, there were so many. So, the premium partners were like Discovery,
Mm.
NBCU. And, I was really happy when the lawsuit was settled and I could finally sign the Viacom deal.
Yeah.
And CBS before it was, reunited. And then there are also lots of other different partnerships, right? Like, so I was also in charge of US Hispanics, so Televisa, Telemundo, all of those guys. And I was in charge of Canadian partnerships as well. So it was nice to be able to go up to Toronto and Montreal, and that's actually how I got to know Watch Mojo.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of serving on their board until I unfortunately had to step down when I went to return to operating at Twitch. But they were one of my biggest partners up in Canada, and they were one of the first, huge OG digital native entertainment networks that came up on YouTube. So being able to see that journey was pretty cool.
Yeah. And what were some of the greatest successes or greatest achievements that you and your team had at YouTube?
Um, I would say commercializing Content ID. So Content ID is the proprietary rights management software that YouTube has, and music was the first industry that really embraced it.
Hmm.
But being able to show premium rights holders how there are three ways of enacting Content ID. You can block content. So this is for user generated content that's uploaded. You could block it if you were the lawful rights holder. You could
Hmm.
track it, which means you would allow that user generated upload to remain and you could see what the usage was, or you could monetize it. And
Yeah.
most premium rights holders were just blocking, and then they were tracking a little bit, but working really closely with the product team to be able to offer different gradations of optionality to then
Mm.
say, hey, if you want to set up a 50% interval of matching, right? Then you could try to monetize it this way. And what we saw is that usually the user generated uploads generated far more views than the actual uploads from the company. And so once we were able to get over the hump of allowing, of convincing companies within, their thresholds to try to monetize it, then we saw their revenue go up meaningfully. So that was really cool to be able to do that and then use that as a litmus test for then helping train the global teams to embrace that as well. And then I'd say the helping YouTube and also Google Play globally launch VOD and EST. That was a lot of fun to be able to work not just at YouTube, but then across with Google Play and launch a really big revenue generating product there.
Yeah.
But there are like too many. I mean, YouTube still, we're all, there's so many of us who are so close, and it was just a really special time to be working there and working with so many smart, like-minded people.
Yeah. And after YouTube, like, how did that opportunity to become chief digital officer for Margaritaville come about?
So I was recruited from YouTube to go work there. So Margaritaville is Jimmy Buffett's lifestyle company. Jimmy Buffett, rest in peace. He was such a good dude. And they had taken some outside capital for the first time. And so they needed someone who was going to be able to come in and launch a new media business, which I did for them, but also serve as their chief digital officer. So it was a really cool opportunity to go in and take, a really strong legacy brand and help usher in some kind of best practices from the digital era. I was not as familiar with, so Jimmy Buffett's fans are called parrot heads, and in going through this process, I found out that one of my uncles who lives in Rhode Island was a parrot head. Who knew? But to be able to see how through his lifestyle ethos, which is what the company represented, how he had so many fans was really cool. And to be able to help connect that digitally was a nice challenge.
Yeah. And what was like the most challenging part of like launching that digital space for Margaritaville?
So I like to joke around that I went from like the land of plenty to the land of not so plenty.
Yeah.
But I think it was a nice challenge for me to be able to say, okay, with limited investment, what can I build? Right. And I'm proud that the team and I were able to really meaningfully demo down their digital audience by over 20 years. I think it's really that fun, laid back lifestyle island ethos that resonates with so many people. And it was seeing that live at his concerts and being able to say, okay, this is the brand playbook, right? This is how we should be able to connect with people through content-led brand marketing versus just sort of hey, here's a BOGO, buy this, get one free. That was really cool to be able to do that. And also, be able to learn from all the storied history of the company, but then bringing in new ideas.
Yeah, and as we move on to the third part of the podcast, talking about your current career, we'll talk about your current career and also some of your most recent roles. So you were on many boards and held some shorter roles, but how did the opportunity to become chief content officer at Twitch, one of the largest streaming platforms?
So I was in my portfolio life when the opportunity for Twitch came along. I was on 3 boards. I was advising earlier stage and later stage companies through McKinsey. So was really enjoying that portfolio life. But I always knew that I still had some fire in the belly left to operate. And when the Twitch opportunity came along, I thought it was, a really unique opportunity to be able to join an exec team of, I would still say the world's biggest and most important live streaming platform. Yeah. And so it felt like the right kind of mix of an opportunity to come back to. And so that's how that opportunity came up. I unfortunately had to give up most of my board seats because it's too hard to operate and be on 3 different boards. But I'm really glad that that opportunity was able to come in because I was able then to combine, I think, a lot of the different learned experiences through my career with helping Twitch.
Yeah, and like, what were you responsible for as chief content officer? Like, for the people listening, what does that entail, basically?
Yeah, so I think the chief content officer role is very different at different companies. At Twitch, it was overseeing the over 8 million streamer relationships. And it also was overseeing at that point started off being like a 200-person content team that was global, so content and ops, and sitting on the executive team. My team also oversaw all of the BD and partnerships for the company. So it was a nice combination of being able to oversee a lot of the business aspects, but then also help the company figure out, okay, how can we continue to grow, but also set ourselves on a path to profitability.
Yeah, and like when I was reading over like some articles I found about your transition to there, one thing they talked about was like the strategic like content vision that you help lead for the company. And I was just wondering like a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I had a wonderful strategy and analytics team as well when I was there, and I think one of the things that we had to deal with, which was pretty common, I think, for a lot of platforms, was dealing with how do we operate in a post-COVID, a post-pandemic environment. When, during the pandemic, everyone was consuming binging content.
Yeah.
Right. And how can you continue to do so? And also, there are many people who came online, employees, who, when you're joining a new company during a pandemic, it's a pretty different kind of environment. Twitch was lucky. We were lucky that we were fully remote, but we still obviously had offices. So for me, what was really important was being able to make sure that I met as many members of the team as possible, because there were, I think, a lot of folks, particularly when you work for a West Coast based company where, it's like the sun, is out in the West Coast, but you want to make sure that everyone feels connected. And I think particularly in certain parts of LATAM or APAC, they didn't necessarily feel connected. So it was important for me to make sure that I could meet the teams and hear them out, but then learn from them too, because many of them had been there and had gone through different phases. I think for the overall content strategy was really rethinking about how can we, if the North Star is making sure that we remain the best global live streaming platform for all streamers, but also have to balance business sustainability, that's kind of tough.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of changes that we had to make in how we thought about coming up and ushering in the next level of streamers to give them more incentives to spend more time on Twitch.
All right. So you were on many boards like WatchMojo. How did those experiences help you and then like lead you to Twitch and also like your other role, like what you are doing now? Like how did that experience, just being on so many boards, seeing so many aspects, help you?
Yeah. I don't understand why more companies won't allow their executives to serve on boards. I understand that is a time commitment and companies don't want their executives to, lose focus, but I genuinely think serving on a board gives executives so many different learnings that you can't, I think, get just from operating. So I'm super grateful that I've been able to serve on boards and, am looking forward to future board service. I was lucky that my first public board was during my time at YouTube. So I joined the board of American Apparel when I was at YouTube. And I remember it was tough to balance it both because in general, boards shouldn't be that much work, but American Apparel was going through, facing tough headwinds. And so because of that, it ended up being like a second full-time job, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think it helps you flex different muscles or develop certain muscles that maybe have been flaccid. And it just really gives you, I think, a newfound appreciation for how companies are run or how companies could be run better. And I think what it did for me is it allowed me to lean into my digital and operating expertise and bring that to the boardroom. But it also allowed me to lean into my prior finance background. So I found that my sweet spot on boards has been serving as audit chair, digital chair, or M&A chair. And I think being able to do that, especially when in my most recent roles, perhaps that wasn't front and center like it was beforehand, is a nice way to kind of keep those juices flowing as well. So to answer your question in terms of how it's helped prepare me for what I'm doing now, I mean, I think for both when I was operating at Twitch and then also what I'm doing now, a well-functioning board is one that is there's a saying for public boards, noses in, fingers out, right? Like you want to be curious, but you can't be super, like you can't be the operator. And I think that's
Yeah.
really important to understand that and understand what your fiduciary duties are. But what's also cool is that at least the boards that I was on, the management teams were very open to directors leaning in. And so I tended to be one of the most leaned in directors, which is
Yeah.
really gratifying. Like I liked being able to have more of a cadence with the management teams, and being able to help in whatever way I could. And in particular, the last two boards I served on, well, three actually, MediaCo, the Arena Group, and WatchMojo, given my domain expertise, it was nice to work closely with the management teams and sometimes their step levels down, to help advise them on deeper strategy. I would also say too that for what I'm doing now, it really gives me a lot more perspective when I'm helping out the C-suite and stakeholder management. I think
Yeah.
harking back to a well-functioning board, you ideally also have to have good stakeholder management. So the best exec teams are able to manage the board well and be transparent enough so that the board isn't surprised.
Yeah.
But it can be super challenging, right? And so I also have a great deal of empathy for management teams because especially when you're a public company, there's a very high bar for not just, reporting to the street, but there's a lot of work that goes into just keeping your board in the loop, keeping them aligned when there's
Yeah.
misalignment, trying to figure that out. And so I think that's given me a lot deeper perspective as an operator and as an advisor.
Yeah, and as we go on to move about what you're doing now at O-Type as the CEO, like why are you like what made you want to transition into this more advising role, and like what are you doing on the daily now?
Yeah, so for me, it's advising a lot of different, medium stage to enterprise level companies. And I think what's really fun for me with this second stage, if you will, of portfolio life is that in the last phase, I really focused more so on like TMT clients, but now I have clients who are beyond just TMT, which is really awesome. And that's a nice way to continue to sort of like flex the muscles, like to be able to bring strategic expertise, go to market expertise, but to brand new industries is really gratifying. I am building up again the board portfolio and all that good stuff. And I wouldn't necessarily discount the right full-time operating role, but I'm being pretty selective about that. And
Yeah.
so answer your question of what does a day look like? I mean, it totally depends on which client that I'm dealing with. And I
Yeah.
think the most fun assignments are when it starts here, but then it mushrooms into something more.
Yeah.
And so with some of my clients, it's kind of mushroomed now. It maybe started off being strategic advice, but then it becomes CEO mentoring, or it becomes, hey, I need you to maybe start interviewing candidates for me to make sure that they're the right fit. So
Yeah.
for someone like me who likes to be able to explore and help out however I can, that's pretty gratifying.
Yeah, and now we'll move on to the fourth part of the podcast, talking about challenges and overcoming obstacles. Being an Asian American in leadership roles comes with its own set of challenges. What were some of the obstacles you may have faced in your industry, particularly due to your background, if you have faced any?
Yeah, I mean, I think and what's been really gratifying is, in the second half of my career, if you will, meeting other executives, but especially Asian American executives or female executives, but and being able to share and bond over some of these experiences. So, certainly, I think we talked about this at the top of the podcast. Like, I
Yeah.
am not a shrinking violet. That has never been my personality.
Yeah.
I'm pretty loud. I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah.
I'm transparent to a fault. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. And so
Yeah.
I think, especially when I was coming up in media, that was pretty shocking for a lot of people who were expecting oh, you're good at numbers, but you should be quiet.
Yeah.
And so, being able to deal with that, and being able to help balance the whole, well, why would you think that? And what do I need to do also to be able to integrate myself better into environments? I think it's important to always have what I call your listening ears on, right? Because
Yeah.
every company is different. And so ideally, you want to go to a company where you can be your truest you, right? But those companies can be few and far between. So I think being Asian American, for me, I think it's something that's super important, but it's certainly had its bumps in the road.
Yeah.
And I think, I've had to learn to soften some edges, but I think I've always, made sure that I was true to myself. Actually, I just came from a female corporate director summit last weekend, and one of the things that stuck out to me was it's sometimes solitary, but it's sometimes okay if you are the only voice in the wilderness. And that really resonated with me because I thought, I'm definitely the person who is not going to be afraid to sort of speak up, especially if I feel like there's a problem around the corner. And it's the way in which I think you have to frame it. But I'm definitely not one of those people who says, oh, wow, I'm just going to, duck my head and just pretend that that's not happening. And I think that can be very challenging, especially, most people don't expect that from Asian Americans.
Yeah. And on like kind of the flip side, like what role has your cultural background played in shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader? And how have you found ways to use that Asian American identity as a strength in your career?
I wouldn't necessarily say, at least for me, that there was like one role that stands out where it's like, oh, it was this or that. I mean, I think for me, it's always been really important to mentor, especially, younger Asian Americans. And that's why I was really pleased that you reached out. I will say, though, at Twitch, I was the guild leader for our Asian Guild, and that really brought me so much joy. Because I could completely empathize and resonate with, and I would have office hours or one-on-ones with folks who said, I feel invisible. I feel like I'm being told to be invisible. And that just breaks my heart. And I feel like where we are in the cultural zeitgeist right now, in this age of, well, now everyone has to just sort of integrate and blend in, and it's the pendulum has swung the other way. And look, the pendulum always swings at some point.
Yeah.
But that to me is ever more important, to say that, we need to make sure that we are paying it forward. And, there's a saying that, like, as you're climbing up the ladder, don't pull it up behind you. And I'm a really big believer in, like, you got to extend the ladder down and make sure that you're paving the way. And so I hope that the pendulum swings sooner the other way. But it was really humbling and gratifying to be able to have people entrust their stories to me and be able to help support people, because I think that's really important. And for me, coming up, it's not as if I had like Asian American mentors, right?
Yeah.
Like I kind of was like, I'm going to figure it out myself. So it's been nice to be able to at least try to be part of that scaffolding for other people.
Yeah. And as we move on to the final part of the podcast, talking about advice and inspiration and also like mentorship, like you just mentioned, like in your experience, what are some of the key traits or habits that lead to long-term success, or where you see these traits in successful people, maybe in the C-suite, from your experience?
I would say, and these are things that I'm now telling myself I should have done. So now these are hopefully lessons I can impart to my children, because these are the mistakes that I made. I always had mentors early on in my career. I'm still close to them, but I don't know if it was just a combination of working a lot, juggling motherhood, or what have you. One of my regrets is that I was not good, I'd say, post kids. So post kids really to me was like my YouTube side of having those mentors. And, people have very different idiosyncratic approaches to it. I tend to be much more organic. I mean, I certainly know that there are people who have crossed my path who have come in and said, like, you will be my mentor. And I'm like, oh, okay. And, I prefer more of an organic relationship forming kind of thing. But I'm always happy to help anyone. But that's a big regret. And I would say I've seen peers of mine do it much better and prioritize that. And so I would say one of my learnings is, in particular, when life gets crazy. So for me, it was working a lot and trying to manage 2 kids and all that stuff. I didn't put the time in to do that. And that's one of my regrets, I would say. So I would say, in terms of advice to folks, just make sure that you're keeping that network alive, and that if you can, try to develop those relationships. I mean, I would say I probably only have one mentor now, and she's amazing. But one of my friends was saying, and maybe this is just me not doing a good job, but they were saying, oh, if they're your mentor, you should be talking to them like every other week. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I talk to her like twice a year. And I just feel like she's really busy, and I don't want to be, I don't know, I don't want to, be a barnacle.
Yeah.
And it's, again, I think to me, it has to come from a genuine place.
Yeah.
And I know there are others who are clearly much better at networking, but I know like when I mentor people, if someone said to me, hey, this is the formula, I need this, I need that, it seems a bit forced.
Yeah.
But I would say that's really important, and making the time to do that, even if it feels as though you have no time, you're sleeping few hours. I would have told my younger self, Laura, maybe you don't need to be at work at 2 a.m. and maybe, you need to think about these things.
Yeah. And how do you define success now, and how has that definition changed since the beginning of your career?
Oh, this is a good one. And I have my husband. I really have my husband to thank for this. During my YouTube time, when we would go on dinner dates, he always said to me, he was like, you need to redefine your definition of success. And what he said to me was, you are too externally motivated. And he was like, and I think that's from your upbringing, from your like very demanding tiger upbringing, that you always feel like you're not good enough, or that, you have to do this to be able to consider yourself a success. And I'm so lucky and grateful that I ended up with Vic, because even though when he gave me the feedback, I was very against it in the beginning. I was like, you're not being supportive of my career. But I mean, it's really resonated since then. And what he said to me is, the definition of success, yes, it should be professional fulfillment, but only to some extent. It really should be around what kind of life are we leading, and what kind of children and family are we bringing up, and how are they turning out.
Yeah.
And, I mean, this, my son is the same age as you. And that really has stuck with me, because now when I think about things, and, I've been very fortunate in my career, but I hope to achieve more. But at the end of the day, if it happened at the expense of not having, good kids or being around for my kids, then I would be a failure. So I think that's really when I think about success, it's the elusive, balance that perhaps I will never find, but of being able to figure out who needs the most help when. Is it me in my professional life, or is it, me as my son is applying to college, as I know you are right now? Like, that's really important to be around and to be present. And I would say, one of my learnings too, especially for people who want to have a family and a career, is that I was not very present when they were younger. And those are some regrets that I have. And now I think I'm a lot more present. But that's important.
Yeah. And like kind of adding on to that for the final question, like if you could leave listeners with one takeaway for building a meaningful and also impactful career, what would that be? I would say, give yourself some grace. And this is kind of me talking to my younger self, and maybe my current old self as well. When it feels like the sky is falling, it probably isn't. And I think, and again, just very grateful to my husband for helping me, forcing me to expand the aperture and say, in the balance of life, what is the most important? And I would also say, different things are more important to you at different stages in your life, and that's okay. And I think that's the beauty of being a human. And for some people, their P0 is always going to be their career, and mazel to them, right? Like, that's amazing. But to me, at different points, it's been my career, but then it's also been like, hey, I need to also make sure that I'm there for my family. And, my generation is the sandwich generation, right? We have aging parents, we have children. And so being able to make sure that I'm there for my extended family is really important as well. So I would say giving yourself some grace, because in the darkest of moments, it's probably not that dark. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. I loved our conversations, all about like your time at Twitch to all about like the advice that you just gave. So thank you so much.
No, of course, Ben. Thank you for having me.